Well, hello. Welcome to the fourth in the ethical violations in the family court series. This one has to do with the violation to standard 3.04, avoiding harm. So, with the APA Ethics Code, standard 3.04, avoiding harm. Now, again, these are required, mandatory ethical standards. Uh, says that psychologists take reasonable steps to avoid harming their clients' patients, students, supervisees, research participants, organizational clients, and others with whom they work, and to minimize harm where it is foreseeable and unavoidable. The key term here is reasonable steps. Psychologists take reasonable steps. Well, it is making a professional level diagnosis, DSM 5, ICD 11, represents a reasonable step for a doctor to take to avoid the foreseeable harm from misdiagnosis if a professional level diagnosis is not made. And so it's just simply a simple risk management thing. Just make a DSM 5 diagnosis, screen for the relevant features to make sure you don't misdiagnose the pathology. Now, what's happening in the family courts, though, is the forensic psychologists are conducting an experiment. They are experimenting on human subjects, the children and parents in the family courts, with an experimental new role, a quasi judicial role for doctors, and also with this experimental new assessment procedure called a forensic custody evaluation that they developed by them for this experimental quasi judicial role. There was no risk benefit analysis undertaken before they were allowed to experiment on human subjects. Otherwise, a lot of this stuff would have been caught and prevented, such as not making a diagnosis when there's diagnostic concerns involved. And there has been no oversight or review of their experiment on human subjects who represent a vulnerable population. Now, the parents in the family courts represent a vulnerable population because of their impaired autonomy in decision making because of the court's involvement. And so they have impaired autonomy in the decision making about their lives, makes them a vulnerable population. In addition, they are even more vulnerable because of their high need for mental health services. They've got a severe family conflict in the family courts. They really need mental health services, and they are subject to court direction. And so that makes them a vulnerable population who warrants special protections if we're going to experiment on them, like experimenting with this new quasi judicial role for doctors where they're advising the court on custody rather than diagnosing and treating the pathology. And that never happened. Now, the reason it never happened is because they left the healthcare system and they're running this experiment through the legal system. So they've escaped all the oversight and review that would be present in the healthcare system if they started to experiment on human subjects and stuff. They moved over. And so they're operating under the authority of the legal system to experiment on human subjects, and they're just allowed to do that. To the tremendous harm of the children and families, or children and parents in the families court. That this experiment on human subjects is a dangerous experiment. That when an outside and independent review of forensic custody evaluations was undertaken by the New York Blue Ribbon Commission on Forensic Custody Evaluation, this experimental assessment approach of their forensic custody evaluations, also called parenting plan assessments, that this experiment was found to be dangerous, harmful to children, and that it produces defective reports that lead to potentially disastrous consequences for parents and children. That would never be approved by an IRB. That would not be approved by any oversight to conduct an experiment that is potentially dangerous and harmful to children? And where's the review on that? Where's the initial risk benefit analysis? Where's the approval for this experiment? None was conducted. Where's the oversight over the years as to what progress they're making with this experiment? Is it harmful? What's going on? Outcome data? None. They were allowed to do this without any oversight, and they did not take steps, reasonable steps, to protect the parents and children from harm due to their experimental approach. This is from the New York Blue Ribbon Commission on Forensic Custody Evaluations. An outside and independent review of this experiment on human subjects. In some custody cases, because of a lack of evidence or inability of parties to pay for expensive challenges of an evaluation, defective reports can thus escape meaningful scrutiny and are often accepted by the court with potentially disastrous consequences for the parents and children. That should not be allowed to be done. It's a dangerous experiment. We need to end this experiment. By an 11-9 margin, the majority of commission members favor elimination of forensic custody evaluations entirely, arguing that these reports are biased and harmful to children and lack scientific or legal value. At worst, evaluations can be dangerous. So these forensic custody evaluators who are ignorant, lack knowledge or information, incompetent in delusional thought disorders, factitious disorders, attachment pathology, family systems, personality disorders, child abuse, and complex trauma, standard 2.01, these ignorant and incompetent, by definition of the English language, psychologists have been allowed to conduct a dangerous experiment that's led to potentially disastrous consequences for children and parents who've had their lives destroyed as a result of this failed experiment. I am that meaningful scrutiny. So it talks about, the Blue Ribbon Commission talks about that they can escape meaningful scrutiny and are often accepted by the courts. That's me, the meaningful scrutiny. That's my role in the family courts. I do document review and I consult on these matters. So I get to read these forensic custody evaluations, go through them line by line, develop a catalog of concerns, pretty consistently present. I am in 100% agreement with the New York Blue Ribbon Commission on Forensic. We need to eliminate forensic custody evaluations entirely. Now, the problem, though, becomes that when we eliminate custody evaluations, we eliminate all the forensic psychologists from the family courts because that's the only thing they do. That's their experiment. So if we eliminate the experiment, we eliminate them. And they don't want to leave the family courts. And they've built themselves into positions of power and influence within the family courts. So right now, there is a tremendous conflict of interest within the forensic psychologists who are intentionally disabling the mental health system response to the pathology of diagnosis and treatment for their own financial and career status gains because they want to continue to do these dangerous and harmful custody evaluations. They don't want them ended. And so that's the current situation. The forensic psychologists will be covering up their failed experiment. They'll be covering up or trying to cover up their ethical violations, the violations of the Belmont Report and experiment. They'll be trying to cover all that up, and they'll have a conflict of interest because they will want to prevent the return to clinical diagnostic assessments 6 to 8 weeks, $2,500 to $5,000 versus their 6 to 9 months, $20,000 to $40,000 assessment. Well, we can get a clinical diagnostic assessment, diagnose the child abuse, and get treatment. And we don't need a custody evaluation. They'll be out of the courts because nobody will want them. Nobody will need them because clinical psychology will have fixed the problem. So they don't want the problem fixed because they want to continue doing their blown up behemoth forensic custody evaluations that solve nothing and that destroy the lives of children and parents in the family courts. Tremendous conflict of interest. We need to get outside and independent review over here. My recommendation is that the AFCC request the APA to do a conference on this, looking at with representation from ethics, cultural psychology, the personality disorder pathology, attachment, family systems, psychometrics of assessment. There's a group that you call in from serious psychology and have them take a look at this situation in the family courts and stop the custody evaluation. Stop them now, right now, boom, stop them. And then we're going to have to look at remediating the low level of professional knowledge over here. Now, the moment they stop the custody evaluation, so that's an admission that they are a failed experiment and that they destroyed the lives of children and parents this entire time. The moment they start remediating the absence of knowledge by trainings in attachment and trainings in family systems and training in delusional thought disorder, that's an admission that they were incompetent this entire time. So it's a very interesting time right now. So there are 4 ethical violations in the family courts: the 2.01, 2.04, 9.01, and 3.04. The forensic psychologists in the family courts are routinely, universally in violation of 4 ethical standards of the APA when there should be 0. Where are the licensing boards in this? They're the ones who are supposed to enforce ethical standards of practice. So where are they? They're nowhere to be seen. Why is that? Why has the oversight function, and how has the oversight function of the licensing board been disabled and lets these psychologists just do whatever they want? That requires further oversight. That would be the APA conference to look at how did the mental health system get disabled and how was this experiment on human subjects, a vulnerable population, allowed to be conducted without any risk-benefit analysis or oversight or review or nothing. So, question I have is, do the licensing boards even care about the dangerous practices going on in the family courts and the rampant unethical practices and ethical violations? But do they care? Do the licensing boards care that the forensic psychologists are ignorant, lack knowledge and information, and incompetent, violations to standards 2.01 and 2.04? Do the licensing boards care that the forensic psychologists are experimenting on human subjects with a dangerous assessment protocol that is harmful to children? Do they care? What about the forensic psychologists? Do they care? Do the forensic psychologists in the family courts care that they are ignorant, lack knowledge or information? Are they trying to acquire that information? Do they care that they're incompetent? Are they applying the DSM-5 and assessing for delusional thought disorders? Are they learning how to do that? Do they care that they're unethical? The violation of boundaries of competence. Are they improving their competence? That's 2.03. Maintaining competence. They should be taking active steps to acquire the knowledge. Do they care that they're making up new forms of pathology rather than apply the established knowledge? 2.04, because they don't know the established knowledge. 2.01. Do they care that their assessments are not based on information and techniques sufficient to substantiate their findings? Do they care about that? Violation 9.01. Do they care that their assessment procedures are harming children and parents? Violation of the 3.04. Are they taking any steps to prevent the harm from their negligent misdiagnosis because they're not diagnosing anything? So with that, that's the concern surrounding 3.04, avoiding harm. So we have 4 violations to ethical standards of the APA that are mandatory. These are required to be compliance. We have 4 violations where there should be 0. 1 violation would be of concern. 2 violations. Oh my God. 4 violations. And nobody's doing anything. Licensing boards, crickets. APA, crickets. AFCC, crickets. Nobody cares about the ethical violations in the family courts. I find that extremely odd. Why is that? How the mental health system has been disabled by the forensic psychologists for their own financial and career status benefit. The parents in the family courts and the children assumed all the risks of the experiment, while the forensic psychologists got all the benefits. Their experiment failed, and the lives of thousands and thousands of children were destroyed and parents were destroyed as a result. We need to end this failed experiment in forensic custody evaluations and return to standard healthcare of diagnosis and treatment. And we accurately diagnose the problem, get an effective treatment plan to fix the problem. And so with that, I'm going to head off to the next in the series, which is about the experiment and the Belmont report. The forensic psychologists are also in violation of all 3 principles of the Belmont report on experimenting on human subjects. So with that, that's the end of this discussion.